Hi friends, so I've been absent for a couple of weeks approximately, and I did a little video on that why that is. So I took some cough suppressant so I could get through this without coughing up a lung. Sorry for the vivid description, but that's how it's been lately for me, bedridden. So I thought I'd just do a quick video about a few of the things that grabbed my attention in the recent week or so, and excuse me if I seem a little dopey, dopier than usual, I should say. Anyway, so Ben Norton, he's an independent journalist with the Grey Zone Project, and he's done an article about Brazil and Lula, who has been put in prison, and he wrote just recently, "We now have the smoking gun of the US involvement in the right-wing coup against Brazil's democratically elected leftist government. Newly leaked messages show corrupt far-right Brazilian judge Sergio Moro said he was waiting for, quote, negotiations with the Americans to carry out the next, quote-unquote, operation against Lula da Silva. Moro was rewarded for imprisoning Lula by being promoted to justice minister for fascist leader Bolsonaro. They recently took a tour of CIA headquarters." So once again, the CIA, no surprises there. The CIA was involved in regime change in Brazil, and now they have a puppet fascist, wannabe dictator, really, Bolsonaro, who, by the way, is losing a lot of popularity, which is good to hear. And so, as one would expect, unfortunately, the CIA helped get rid of Lula da Silva. And now they have a fascist, awful fascist, wannabe dictator. And you can find that essay of Ben Norton's on the greyzoneproject.com. And also from the Grey Zone, there's another essay, but it's called "Weaponizing Human Rights. UN Chief Bachelet's Venezuela report follows US regime change script." The meddling of the U.S., the Washington in the Latin America is just legendary, really. It's been going on and on for a long time. This Venezuela is, under constant attack, whether it's crippling U.S. sanctions, which have killed 40,000 plus Venezuelans since 2017, and they're just putting more and more sanctions on. And if you follow John Bolton on Twitter, he's constantly putting out propaganda, and so is Pompeo. Anyway, so it says former UN Special Rapporteur Alfred Desire slams UN High Commissioner Bachelet's report on Venezuela as a politicized collection of baseless accusations by, quote, advocates of regime change, end quote. Oh, sorry, and this is by Anya Parampil, Anya Parampil. Anya Parampil went and occupied the Venezuelan embassy in Washington when they were trying to storm the embassy, despite the fact that the Venezuelan government had given full permission for the Venezuelan embassy collective to stay there and protect the embassy. But they stormed it anyway. Anyway, Anya Parampil was an RT reporter and independent journalist as well, and she's now doing reports for the Grey Zone Project. So when United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet traveled to Venezuela earlier this year, she met with an array of citizens who lost family members to right-wing violence in the country. Among them was Ines Esparragoza, whose 20-year-old son, Orlando Figueroa, was doused with gasoline and lit on fire by an opposition mob during violent anti-government riots known as garimbas in May 2017. And you may have seen Avi Martin and Mike Preisner go down to Venezuela during that time to do various reports from Venezuela at that time, and you can check them out on the Empire Files. So I'll skip down a few paragraphs, and it said Alfred Desayas became the first UN rapporteur to visit Venezuela in 21 years, traveling to the country in 2017 to examine the social and economic impact of unilateral coercive measures applied by the US. He determined US-led sanctions were largely to blame for the country's hardship, accusing Washington of waging, quote, economic warfare, end quote, and comparing its harsh measures to, quote, medieval sieges of towns, end quote. Desayas was no less scathing towards Bachelet's report, slamming it as a politicized document that depends heavily on unfounded claims by activists dedicated to Maduro's removal. The new Bachelet's report is methodically, he said, the new Bachelet report is methodically flawed, as were indeed the earlier reports relying overwhelmingly on unverified allegations by opposition politicians and advocates of regime change who are only interested in weaponizing human rights, end quote, the former special rapporteur told the Grey Zone. He said, he continued, the same occurred with the reports of former UNHCHR Zed. Dizayas continued, referring to Bachelet's predecessor, quote, the lack of professionalism on part of the UN Secretariat is a disgrace and should be exposed by civil society. So I'll let you read that essay, the title which I've mentioned already on greyzone.com. Sorry, it's thegreyzone.com, that's where you can find it. And from what I understand, I haven't been able to look into this much because I've been unwell, but from what I've seen, from what John Bolton has been posting, and he's such a propagandist, warmonger, unhinged person, he was basically, from what I understand, Bachelet was accusing Maduro of almost like having death squads, and killing thousands of people. That's what I understood it to be. I might be wrong here, but that's basically making out as if Maduro is some dictator and that he's killed thousands of people, something like that. That's a really good essay, so do check it out. It's kind of frightening, I find, that today it's basically to find sources that you can trust. Like sometimes you can trust the UN, and sometimes you can't. And it's sort of like you have to kind of look into it and look into the background of the people who write these reports. You have to look at the general mainstream media propaganda of about that particular country, like Venezuela. There's heaps of propaganda about that country in the mainstream media. And then you sort of, if I hear something that seems like it's attacking Maduro in a sort of extreme fashion, you can probably guess that it's going to be more propaganda. And, it usually turns out, when I first heard her about her report and how sort of it was basically ignoring the economic sanctions of the US and with a tremendous devastation, I immediately thought, hello, if one is ignoring that, if UN, somebody, who's writing a report ignores something so incredibly obviously wrong, and basically something that is a war on Venezuela by the US, economic sanctions are an act of war, and it's killed 40,000 plus Venezuelans so far. If she's ignoring that basically, and if she's ignoring the fact that Trump has cracked down on the CLAP program, CLAP, and that actually is helping provide many families that are very poor with access to food, etc. If they're ignoring that, then there's something really wrong. So these days you really have to sort of analyze things and think about the sources and the possible motivations and all that kind of thing. And you have to do it constantly. You can't just sort of go, oh well, this is a good independent news source, I'm going to stick with that no matter what. I mean, you have to be constantly reassessing. There's nobody today that I have a total 100% trust in. I mean, there are some that I have pretty much close to 100% trust in. Like I mentioned, the Empire Files. I don't expect Abby Martin to be jumping on the gravy train of the MSN anytime soon, or people like her. But, one has to always keep, a certain sort of a thing in the back of one's mind, just to be sure, because, we have to always have that analysis and to sort of thinking about motivations and all that kind of thing. And looking and getting various news sources too, not just relying on one news source. So, but at the present time, I think I find the sources that I'm using, I think, are very trustworthy. But like I say, we always, you've got to be on the alert. I'm no journalist, but I've been following independent journalists for a while, and I think I've sussed that out to some degree. But what do I know? So anyway, So sadly, they're determined, the national security state, the military-industrial complex, the Democrats, the Republicans, they're all determined to get rid of Maduro. Venezuela is sitting on one of the largest, or the largest reserve of oil in the world today, so they're desperate for that oil by any means necessary. So, that we can expect that's going to just continue on until they're successful. I mean, they're successful. They've managed to meddle in most Latin American countries and have been successful in some cases, and they're determined to do the same with Venezuela. So you probably know of Ajama Baraka, who was a running mate for Jill Stein in the Green Party in the 2016 election. He's from the Black Alliance for Peace, and he writes for the Black Agenda Report. He's an amazing activist, and he wrote, this is about Jeffrey Epstein. I'm not going to spend much time on Jeffrey Epstein because there's plenty of stuff out there about Jeffrey Epstein. Some of it's very lopsided. Jeffrey Epstein was basically a billionaire. Nobody really knows quite how he got his money. That's up for question. It's said that he was a hedge fund manager, but he's got a lot of money, a $70 million apartment somewhere, which they've taken back because he's been rearrested. He's been arrested again. He was arrested a few years ago for running a child sex ring, and underage girls, and many underage girls, and pimping them out to people basically, but also using them for himself, for his own purposes. And he was arrested, and then he got a sweetheart deal by Acosta, basically 13 months. I mean, anybody else would have been put in prison for the rest of their life. But he got this sweetheart deal where he basically could go to work every day and come home in this huge big wing of one of those pretend prisons, and sleep overnight in the prison. And he did that for 13 months, basically going to work, still working, and coming back to the prison at nighttime to sleep there. But it was such an easy deal. It was such a sweetheart deal that a lot of people didn't even know he was in prison. He was, this is somebody, a billionaire, who was running the Lolita Express, which, that's what he called it, where there was underage girls, which had Bill Clinton, the former president, on there 26 times. He said he was only on there 4 times, but it seems, according to the logs, it was 26 times. Upon the arrest again of this Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Clinton has put out this statement that he's only been with him 4 times, and they were to visit Africa for some AIDS from HIV sort of a conference or something. I think Bill Clinton's trying to make out like that's the only interest he had in Jeffrey Epstein. Well, it seems like he spent a lot more time on the plane than that. So, apparently also Donald Trump has not so much connection with Jeffrey Epstein, but has said on Twitter that Jeffrey Epstein is a nice guy. He says that about a lot of people, of course, but he said, and he likes his women young. So, it was, and the irony, the ridiculousness of it is that a lot of right-wing nationalist sort of Trump supporters seem to think that Donald Trump is some sort of a pedophile hunter. I would say I don't have a clue what his real involvement is with Jeffrey Epstein, but Acosta, the lawyer who gave Jeffrey Epstein that deal a few years ago, and the 13 months in this like a holiday camp almost, where he was still able to go to work. He's basically resigned as Labour Minister. Donald Trump gave him the position of Labour Minister. I don't know. It's a very strange thing, and so you probably, if you've been following any of it at all, you realise that he has had connections with high society, Jeffrey Epstein, and it's possible that there was high-profile politicians as well as celebrities involved in sex with underage girls, whether they knew it or whether they did not know it. That's up for debate, of course. It's possible. There's talk that There's talk that Jeffrey Epstein may have been using it as extortion. It's like here's these girls saying that they're a certain age when they're really only 14, and then using that as blackmail. Who knows? And then there's talk about Jeffrey Epstein being attached to intelligence, sort of in some ways linked to intelligence services. So who knows? Who knows? I mean, it all sounds very conspiratorial. But there's a lot of dirty dealings going on now, and it's very easy, I think, to extort and blackmail politicians these days with the NSA surveilling everything that is said and done by basically everybody, and that includes politicians. So it's very easy, I would imagine, to extort and get politicians to do what you want them to do. And I would say if there was any sort of intelligence services involvement where they wanted to pin anything on different politicians or celebrities, they could do so by getting these politicians and celebrities involved in having sex with underage girls, saying that they're not that age. But I would say there's probably a lot of celebrities and politicians who believe they're above the law, and basically, it's that sort of Eyes Wide Shut sort of thing by Stanley Kubrick, where there's a whole other thing going on of, pedophile rings. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of right-wing conspiratorial nonsense about that, and also a lot of right-wing conspiratorial stuff about Donald Trump being some kind of, he's going to round up all the pedophiles and all this sort of stuff, QAnon kind of thing, Pizzagate and all that kind of stuff. So, it's all sort of very messy. Why I'm mentioning it is I wasn't going to go right into that. I actually wasn't, but I ended up, once you sort of mention something, then you have to explain something else. I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining it because I'm not that interested in it. I would like to see, though, I have to say, and I would like to see if Bill Clinton is involved in this. I would like to see him behind bars, because I think he's done a lot of things I think he's done a lot of things that are corrupt in the Clinton initiative and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of things that both of them, both Hillary Clinton and he, deserve to be behind bars. And I would like to see, since he's been traveling on the Lolita Express so often, I can't imagine that something has not happened in the 26 times that he's been on that plane. I would like to see, and anybody, whether it's Donald Trump, I would like to see anybody involved in that behind bars. But to be honest, I don't expect that anyone who is a politician will ever see the inside of a prison cell, because they protect their own. Even if Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton hate Donald Trump, they don't want to see him behind bars as much as they might protest that they do. None of these politicians want to see any of their cronies, any of the oligarchy behind bars, because they all protect one another, and it sets a precedent. So they don't really want to see him impeached either, because it sets a precedent. All this kind of stuff. They all protect one another, even if they don't like each other. But why I mentioned this, and I really didn't mean to go into all of that. And by the way, I mean, it's possible that Jeffrey Epstein may cut a deal with someone and say, okay, I'll spill the beans about Bill Clinton and all of that. Somebody suggested that Donald Trump may even be behind this particular thing. I don't think so. But that it's a sort of, who knows who's behind it really, but and why. Maybe it's the Democratic Party behind it, trying to, now that Russiagate is fizzled out and they couldn't make anything stick with Russiagate, so they're looking for some other thing, and it happens now to be Jeffrey Epstein in the billionaire pedophile ring sort of thing. Who knows? I mean, it's so messed up. I mean, they're in a world of their own, these people, these oligarchs and, the politicians, the ruling class. They don't give a toss about us. We're not in their club, and they've got there's this whole other thing going on, a little sort of theater that's going on, distracting us from all the other awful things that are happening. It's this constant theater. If it's not Russiagate, now it's this, and so forth. So I didn't want to feed into that, but this is what Ajama Baraka. And of course, the terrible thing about this, of course, is that there are all these young women who are traumatized for life, and who knows if some of them haven't already killed themselves, and will probably never know the extent of the damage or the extent of the amount of young women or young men, who knows. We will never know the extent. And so all these lives are being destroyed or almost destroyed, and all these oligarchs don't give a toss. All they really care about is saving their own necks. So Ajama Baraka, as I mentioned before, he said, people in the U.S. believe that the U.S. is exceptional because they know nothing about its history. There is nothing out of the ordinary with Epstein. He is not the first powerful pedophile. Sally Hemings was 14 years old when Thomas Jefferson took her to Paris. Over the years back in the U.S., she was subjected to systemic rape over the years, resulting in 5 children with Jefferson. And do you think the other 12 presidents who owned slaves behaved any differently? That is why you can only smile when you hear folks talk about Trump being the most morally bankrupt president ever. Know your history. So that's Ajama Baraka. I think that's a really excellent point. He says another thing here. And he always puts a reality into things, really, because he always manages to inject reality. And he does mention this other thing about reparations. Ajama Baraka, he said, Africans, it is reasonable to expect is it reasonable to expect reparations from a state that won't even release our freedom fighters from prison who are fighting for our collective human rights and our quote-unquote repair? Demand that the state release our freedom fighters to indicate a seriousness about reparations. And he's talking about, of course, the Black Panthers, who have just been thrown in prison and under the most suspect circumstances. And that's true. I mean, that would be, the state would be serious if they released those people. But that's not going to happen. And reparations, by the way, the state can afford that. It's a sovereign country, sovereign economy, and it can afford reparations. I'm not going to say much about that now. I could say some more about that, but I won't. I'm just going to skip to the next thing. So I read something today where the Bikini Atoll has 1,000 times the radiation of Chernobyl. There was U.S. atomic bomb tests conducted at Bikini Atoll in July 1946. Isn't it outrageous that the West just uses basically indigenous people's lands? And this, here they do it. They bombed in the center of Australia where there were indigenous people there, and of course indigenous native animals. People never really mention the animals that suffer these dreadful atomic bomb experiments. And the irony of it, they already tested on people. They already bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and know what and they didn't have to do that, by the way. The war was coming to an end. They did that because they could, because they wanted to test. The U.S. wanted to test those nuclear weapons on people and see what damage incurred, what damage happened to those people, and that's why they went ahead and they bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So you would think that, and they used to test on U.S. soldiers. The Empire Files did an excellent thing about the testing that they did on U.S. soldiers, nuclear tests. So you would think that, why on earth do they keep testing when they actually had done a major war crime and had the results of that? But anyway, so, and if you've watched John Pilger, who's an independent Australian journalist, a really great one of the very few left now in Australia, who spends a lot of time in the UK and is kind of pretty much treated like a pariah by the Australian mainstream media because we have no fourth estate to speak of in Australia. So he's one of the very few that speaks the truth, as well as the Juice media. You'll have to check that out, the Juice media, Juice media. There's so few now. We have even less than the United States, decent independent journalists. So anyway, so the radiation levels in the Marshall Islands, and John Pilger actually did The Coming War on China. It's a documentary, and he shows, what they did in the Marshall Islands in The Coming War on China. And it's just dreadful. They tied animals to the decks of these U.S. Navy ships, and they positioned these U.S. Navy ships all around the islands. You see, not only were they testing on those islands and not informing any of the people around that area, the indigenous populations, but they were that like I think they evacuated the actual islands, or did they? I can't really remember. I think, but there's a lot of population were terribly affected by that. And when you hear that it's still 1,000 times the radiation of Chernobyl, even now, and this is many decades later, it really tells us a lot about what it must be like for anybody who was living around there straight after. But they actually still used the military as also guinea pigs, in quotes. And they had animals, farm animals, on the ships there, and sort of tied them to, these posts and everything. So they and left them on board and basically, to see what level of damage was done to these animals. But the ships were there, and all the military personnel. And if you look at the old footage, you can see when the blasts go off, there's this big, sort of shockwave going past the ships. It's outrageous. I mean, the fact that they, this just shows the level of disregard they have for their own military. The military they so-called hold up in high esteem every State of the Union address, exploiting some military person who's done something and holding them all up, and yet treating them like they're guinea pigs. Excuse the, I'm vegan. I don't agree with any of this. It's just appalling. So anyway, the radiation levels in the Marshall Islands, where the US government tested its nuclear arsenal during the Cold War, are even higher than those found in Fukushima and Chernobyl, according to a newly released peer-reviewed study. And as I was saying, just Western imperialist nations using indigenous peoples' lands and islands as their dumping grounds, as their test sites. As I said, in the centre of Australia, where there was indigenous people living there, they did a nuclear test there. They also had military there who were close to the site, who were also affected. Of course, there was all these animals in that area, and they just use these people. As in Australia, Indigenous people were not seen as people. They were seen as part of the the fauna of the country. It was still up until 1968. I was 8 years old, and the Indigenous people in my country were still seen as fauna, as animals. Now, I'm vegan, so I don't think that any animal, human animal or non-human animal, that is sentient, is property, is fauna. Like I think all animals, human and non-human, are morally equal, and so that's why I don't use them. I don't eat, wear, and use them, right? And this gives you an indication of our attitude towards Indigenous people, even up until the early 60s. I'm pretty sure it was 1968. Isn't that a frightening thing to think about? So anyway, so the research published by scientists at Columbia University in New York found that the tests of soil samples taken from 4 of the islands contain radiation levels that are, quote-unquote, significantly higher than those found at the sites of the 2 worst nuclear power plant disasters in history in Japan and Ukraine. One of the islands, the concentrations of radioactive particles were found to be higher by a magnitude of 1,000. And by the way, the US never bothered to secure the Pacific nuclear waste in these coffins from leaks. So basically, there's these large, coffins, cement coffins of nuclear waste that are at some point just going to leak, or are probably already leaking, into the Pacific Ocean. The US government performed 67 nuclear tests in the South Pacific Islands between 1946 and 1958 during its early arms race with the Soviet Union. The exercises left a trail of contamination throughout 21 islands, roughly halfway between Hawaii and Australia. Although representing just 6% of the total US nuclear bomb testing activity, the detonations were responsible for over half of the total energy expended. And the most famous of them took place on Bikini Atoll, where Operation Crossroads and Operation Castle were launched in 1946 and 1954, respectively. The former has been described as, quote, the world's first nuclear disaster, end quote, while the latter resulted in an explosion, Castle Bravo, 1,000 times more powerful than the blast caused by the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. I see. So basically they were testing out much stronger nuclear weapons. Notice, though, that they, using other people's backyards rather than their own. So, the contamination entered the food chain, and I don't know, it's just shocking. It's shocking to me that these sort of things, I mean, the amount of crimes that have occurred. I mean, we must be like the just evil monsters to some of these indigenous people, seriously. And they just have to, and we just continue on, and now we're going to take the whole planet with us, with imminent human extinction on the horizon, with the climate crisis. We really are something else, particularly the West. We really are. And just quickly, you may have been following that there's a lot of people, a lot of black activists from the Ferguson protests were after Michael Brown was executed by a police officer who got off, of course. Very rarely does ever any police officer, unless they're black and their name is Muhammad, like somebody recently who shot that Australian woman outside her home. His name was Muhammad, and he was black, and he's been put in prison for 12 years. He's a police officer. Unless you're somebody who's black whose name is Muhammad, you're probably not going to see the inside of a jail cell. And there's been, at least from what I understand, 6 different Ferguson activists after that Michael Brown execution who have now been found have so-called suicided in the back of their car, or something like that, or been murdered or something, which is very frightening. And I think there's possibly it could be the police. It could be the police that is doing that, or somebody who's, some incredible racist, who's going around doing that. But it's really awful. Like basically lynchings. One black male, young black male, was literally he was hung in a tree. So the first was Edward Crawford, then Deandra Joshua, Darren Seals, then Dunye Jones. Dunye Jones was the one who was hung in the tree. So basically, that's something to watch, and that's really frightening to think there's actually more lynchings going on after the protests of the most prominent protesters, black activist protesters, after Michael Brown was killed. And that's been happening since 2014. There's a lot of other stories that I could talk about, but I don't want to. This is already running long. So I'm just going to do a couple more. A lot of things happen, and if I haven't been able to really do anything because I've been unwell. There's an article in Shadowproof. Shadowproof, it says, when the CIA and other agencies in the United States government pushed for the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, the IIPA, in 1981, it was crafted to exclude covert agents who resided in the U.S. There was consideration by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence of how the legislation might, quote, chill or stifle public criticism of intelligence activities or public debate concerning intelligence policy, end quote. More than 3 decades later, the CIA is apparently unsatisfied with the protections the bill granted, quote, covert agents. It has enlisted a select group of senators and representatives to help expand the universe of individuals who are protected, making members of the press who cover the intelligence matters more vulnerable to prosecution. So, see, here we go. The U.S. has been vilifying and imprisoning whistleblowers, and that was escalated by Obama, even though he said he was going to protect whistleblowers, and of course Donald Trump. And now they're trying to make it easier for the members of the press to be vulnerable to prosecution. See, this is how the fascist state happens. This is how you move closer and closer to fascism and authoritarianism. So the Democratic Representative Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, was involved in adding language to expand the IIPA to the Intelligence Authorization Act moving through Congress. Schiff is once again putting the interests of the intelligence agencies in concealing their misdeeds ahead of protecting the rights of ordinary Americans by criminalizing routine reporting by the press on national security issues and undermining congressional oversight in his intelligence authorization bill, end quote, declared Daniel Schuman, who is the policy director for Demand Progress. Schuman added, quote, Schiff's expansion of the Intelligence Identity Protection Act beyond all reason will effectively muzzle reporting on torture, mass surveillance, and other crimes against the American people, all at the request of the CIA. Schiff is clearly the resistance to the resistance, and he should drop this provision from his bill, end quote. The CIA put their specific request for what language they would like amended in writing and sent it to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Their request was essentially copied and pasted with no changes into the intelligence bill. Quote, undercover agency officers face ever-evolving threats, including cyber threats, end quote, the CIA argued. Quote, particularly with the lengths organizations such as WikiLeaks are willing to go to obtain and release sensitive national security information, as well as incidents related to past agency programs, such as the RDI investigation, in brackets, CIA torture report, end quote, CIA torture report, end brackets. The original congressional reasoning mentioned above for a narrow definition of, quote, covert agent, end quote, no longer remains valid, end quote. That's what the CIA said. And they continued, quote, this proposal would provide protection for all undercover agency officers by allowing for the prosecution of individuals responsible for disclosing the identities of those officers, regardless whether the undercover officer serves inside or outside of the United States, end quote, the agency additionally stated. So, and as they mentioned, WikiLeaks the CIA calls WikiLeaks a, quote, non-state hostile intelligence service, end quote, not a media organization. How convenient. Okay, so that's from Shadow Proof, SHADOW Proof, and that essay is by Kevin Gostola, the 11th of July 2019. So, and it's titled Invoking WikiLeaks and Torture Report, CIA Pushes for Expansion of Secrecy Law to Stifle Public Criticism. So anyway, oh joy. Lastly, I just read something today where some particular person from up in the north of Africa went to the Congo, and he's now been diagnosed with Ebola, which is a very serious and deadly virus. And so there's a sort of widespread panic now in the Congo that this might start taking hold there. So that's a very frightening prospect. Anyway, so really that's all I'll talk about today. There are other things I was going to talk about, but that will do for now. So thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you like the content. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive any updates when I drop a video. Thank you so much for watching and for leaving your comments. I always appreciate them, and feel free to always leave comments. I have no problem with people disagreeing with me. I mean, I'm not a journalist, and I do give, because I'm not a journalist, I can speculate, and hopefully I get my facts right. Sometimes I think I'm probably a little bit off with some of them, with numbers and stuff, but I do my best. It's done in good faith. I do it because I'm anti-war and I'm an anti-imperialist, and I believe in social equality. I guess you could say I'm definitely socialist-leaning, or possibly anarcho-syndicalist. I guess you could even say, I think, more is the case. And I also am vegan, and that's a very, very, very important thing to me, veganism. And it's all related to all these issues of imperialism and stuff, in that we are oppressing a group based on an irrelevant criterion species, and we are exploiting, torturing, and killing over 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year. They're sentient, and their only crime, in quotes, is that they were born on the planet with us, another species. That's not a good reason to be exploiting and killing them. We don't need animal products at all to survive. We can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason we're torturing and killing and exploiting and taking away the life of these sentient animals who just want to live like we do and do not want to die, is the only reason is because we think they taste good, and that's not good enough. That's not morally justifiable. So I ask you to please go vegan. It'll be one of the best decisions you make in your life. I've been vegan for 14 years, and believe it or not, I have very, very rarely ever get sick. I'm really very healthy. It's just that I was looking after somebody who had, in close quarters with somebody who had a very, very virulent flu, and I managed to get it myself. But in fact, I haven't had a flu since I went to Vietnam in 2012. And before that, I can't remember the last time I had a virus that was like this, or even close to it. I just tend to be incredibly healthy. So now I put that down to just a really good diet and, exercise, and I could do with some more exercise, and vitamin D, D for David, all those sort of things. Prevention is better than all these other things that we're doing. Prevention and also not participating in violence. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Hopefully next time when I talk to you, my voice will be better, because honestly, I've had my throat even now feels like it's on fire. I've been coughing so much, and literally I've just been in bed the last 2 or 3 days, and I just got up out of bed to do this. I thought, I feel like doing it. I'm going to do it while I can, and hopefully I can get through it without coughing up, without basically choking on my coughing. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, bye for now.